Hi, in this session we're going to be looking at the skill of ridge soaring. So ridge soaring is using lifting air, which is wind being deflected up when it strikes a ridge or a hill, and there's a vertical component which is greater than the sink rate of your glider. Now you normally sink at about 300-400 feet per minute, so if we can find air that's going up faster than that, it's quite easy to stay up. Sometimes it's very simple. In this shot, which was taken in Rhossili in South Wales, there is a huge area of lift. In fact, I think there's cubic kilometres of air which are rising faster than the paraglider is sinking, so it's very easy to identify and use that lift. But it's not always like that. Sometimes the wind is very light or it's off the hill. You can see here, sometimes the soaring pilot, in order to use a very meagre ridge lift band, has to stay quite close to the terrain. So this requires a good degree of skill. So fundamentally, it's all about reading the hill, the shape of the hill, and the wind direction and strength to work out where the best lift is going to be. Secondly, because you're going to be in the air for some time compared to a top to bottom flight, is keeping an eye on how the wind is changing and the weather is changing, and it's what's happening upwind of you. And the third thing is other hazards. Usually if you're going to be in the air for a while, there's going to be other pilots launching. It may get quite crowded, so it's really important that you keep a good lookout. So all these things are going on simultaneously. Very important that you look over your shoulder and check that the space is clear that you're about to turn into. So when you're ridge soaring, you identify where the ridge is going to be, you fly along, keep an eye out for other pilots. In this case we can see someone coming the other way, so the pilot here, Mark, has moved out slightly. This is Stanage Edge in the Peak District, to give the other pilot plenty of room to get past. So flying in a predictable manner and a pattern, it makes it easier for everybody. Right, back in Morocco again here now, and you can see on the left here the cliff is the steepest part of the hill, so that's going to be the bit that's producing the most lift. There is another pilot out ahead to keep an eye on, but it looks like he's flying out. In fact, he's going down, so it's not a hazard. So as long as it's clear, I'm just turning here to try and stay on the steepest part of the hill. I can see from the other pilot there's nothing much ahead of me. But back here, not only is it steep here, but it's also rock facing into the sun. So, as I was rather hoping, here we are, get a bit of lift coming off, and because there's a bit of lift there, I've suddenly turned into it. So you have to be a little bit opportunist. If you find a good chunk of lift and it's clear, turn into it. This is a little thermal now forming, so if there's enough room you can go all the way around, do a 360, and this one looks like it's climbing all the way around. All the time looking out ahead, you can see there's an inversion out ahead, so not looking particularly good for cross country today, and no cumulus clouds. But it's also looking clear, so I'm not expecting any sudden increases in wind speed or direction. So there we are now, climbing away 500 or 600 feet, and now transitioning from ridge soaring flight into thermaling. Sometimes it's completely clear, like this, and you can fly in glassy smooth air, although I don't recommend you taking your hands out of the controls for very long. But other times you need to be quite active. In this shot, jockey's flying in South America, and there's quite a lot of turbulence mixed in with the ridge lift, so you need to be flying actively all the time. In this shot, same shot actually, same camera shot as earlier in Rhossili, within a few minutes this had happened. Orographic cloud had started to form on the hill, completely obscuring the takeoff, so making it impossible to land there. And again, a significant hazard, as there were other people in the air as well. So you need to keep an eye out for all these things. Fundamentally, reading the ridge, reading the wind, keeping an eye on what's happening up ahead of you and how it's changing. A windsock's very useful for that. And most important of all, flying safely with other people, making sure that you check that the space you're turning into is clear. To ridge soar successfully, you really need a little bit of information about how the air is going to behave over the terrain. So I've covered this in one of the previous theory sessions. I believe it's number 6, micrometeorology, so it's worth having a look at that if you haven't done already. And a few other tips about soaring successfully. Top tips really is that the first turn is often crucial. Decide which way that you're going to turn before you actually launch, and that way you'll save a bit of time. A nice neat turn getting you into lift band established twice and early is very helpful. If the wind is slightly off the ridge, it's often useful to make your first turn so that your first beat is on the into wind beat, because then things happen a little bit more slowly, gives you a bit more time to get settled in your harness, and hopefully gain a bit of height before you turn on the downwind beat. Second tip is the higher that you get, the further out the lift band is likely to extend. So as you climb, you can start pushing out further out away from the hill, which gives you more room, other pilots more room, and of course you're in a better position if you should pick up a thermal, for example. The third one, and probably the one that is most useful to you if you're trying to stay up in Rift, is always turn in a lifting bit. Simple as that. You can actually decide that you're going to fly along a ridge and turn when you get to a certain point. But you have to be, as mentioned earlier, quite sort of opportunist. If a patch of lift comes along and you suddenly feel yourself climbing, your reaction should immediately be to check the space is clear and start to turn out into it. If it turns out to be nothing much at all, well, you can just turn back the way you were. If it's a good spot, it's worth turning and perhaps making your 180-degree turn there to start flying back through that area of lifting lift once again. Okay. I mentioned the wind being off a little bit earlier. If the wind is off a ridge, and frequently it's not blowing directly onto the ridge, so there's an upwind and a downwind beat, it's important that you maintain sufficient airspeed and sufficient room to turn away, if necessary, on a downwind beat. Because when the wind is off, there's not very much ridge lift, the temptation for an experienced pilot is to scratch very close to the ridge, even on their downwind leg, but this can be a mistake. By all means, on the upwind leg, you can tuck in a little bit, but when you're going fairly downwind, pilots do sometimes get caught by this, so give yourself a little bit of room to manoeuvre and ensure you've got a little bit of airspeed in hand. And finally, as already mentioned a couple of times, stay alert. That is, to other pilots, keep moving your head around so you know where other people are. Maintain sort of situational awareness of other pilots that are using the sky so it doesn't come as a surprise. And also looking upwind to check on the weather changes. I mentioned the cloud earlier on, but the wind can pick up or can change direction. And make sure you're still within range of a landing area, for example. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoy your ridge soaring. I hope that's been useful.